Good evening, everyone. This is Eugene Moy, and I'd like to welcome you to the February meeting of the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California. It's a program meeting where, as we have been doing for the past, 50 years that we've been around, we've been hosting uh, many programs of interest to our community. And we try to share our Chinese American and Asian American history to the best that we can. And actually, in this area, we have many um, talented scholars, and we hope that this will be just one of many programs that illustrate the breadth and scope of our community. Just a couple of housekeeping items. One, the program will be recorded and we will post on YouTube probably pretty soon, right after our program meeting. Uh, if you have questions while the program is running, while Gerald is speaking, please feel free to um, submit your questions in the Q&A box that you can see on your screen. For everyone's information, we have decided to shift to a webinar format rather than the full Zoom type of program, uh, partly because it's just more secure and we don't have as many problems. But you can still ask your questions through the Q&A process. We'll be immediately moving into the program by Gerald, but let me first do a quick introduction. The actual program is entitled, and we apologize if in the original announcement we apologize to Gerald. We missed part of the full title, but it really is called Little Manila in DTLA or downtown LA and Carlos Bulosan in Los Angeles. And he'll tell you what, explain a little bit more. But Gerald is is a founding board president of the Filipino American Arts Inc. And he's a graduate of Belmont High School, so he's a local in LA. And he achieved his Bachelor of Arts at UCLA in sociology, and he completed his graduate studies at Cal Poly Pomona. He'll share a little bit of background, and I should mention that he has worked in the urban planning field for the city of LA and in LA City Hall and in Sacramento. And perhaps he'll share a little bit more of that background. But we're here to hear Gerald's knowledge and to mine his rich history with our LA Filipino American community. So, Gerald, I'll let you take off from here and you can share a little bit more information on yourself and also on the history of the community. Gerald?
Thank you, Eugene Moy. I really appreciate the opportunity to present today. I'm Gerald Gubatan, and I would like to share information on what was once called Little Manila in downtown Los Angeles, and also this historic literary figure named Carlos Bulosan in Los Angeles. So thank you to the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California. My paths have crossed with Eugene Moy in the past. He actually also has an urban planning background. I'd like to thank Susan Dixon and Susie Ling for connecting me with the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California. So it's my great pleasure to be here today. And there are many people to thank on the slide here over the years who have really explored our history and culture in Los Angeles. And so Joseph Bernardo, Linda Espana Meram, Rosalind Sagara, Michelle Magalong, Caroline Sobrino Bonivier, Greg Villanueva, the late Roy Morales, and the late Helen Akawili Brown. So many of these are kind of my mentors as well. So let's see, how do I? So I start with the question, Little Manila in downtown LA, question mark. There's no evidence that it ever even existed. I've heard community members talk about Bronzeville in Little Tokyo, which was the African American community coming into Little Tokyo during World War II, after the Japanese were incarcerated and brought to internment camps. But there's not much discussion or talk about the presence of a Little Manila. So part of me, a lot of me felt, I feel I need to tell the story. And a lot of this is, part of this is my own awakening of my own personal history. My father, Severo Doria Gubatan, passed away when I was only 15 years old. So I found myself trying to research and learn more about his life history so I could also know his experience, and that would inform my experience. So my awakening starts with my own father's history. And I learned about a book here. You can see Linda Espaniamaram. She's a professor at Long Beach. And she wrote this book a few years ago, Creating Masculinity in Los Angeles's Little Manila, Working Class Filipinos in Popular Culture, 1920s, 1950s. Her thesis is that these Filipino males who came to Los Angeles needed to find ways to express their masculinity, and it was a mostly male society. So they exhibited that through their attire, through boxing, through going to the dance halls. And here's an image on the front cover. So I went to her book reveal, and I looked and I realized that image is actually an image of my father and his compadres. So on the far left is my dad, Severo Gubatan. In the middle is Abe Ferrer. And then you have Aquino. And this was taken in about 1932 in Long Beach. And the community had contributed photographs to the Shades of LA program with the LA Library. And Linda Merrim found that image in the library. So, you know, we connected, and it was kind of cool. So I found this letter dated April 1929 from the provincial governor of Pangasinan, and it's directed to Severo Gubatan, and the address is at 131 and a half South Broadway. So that's First and Broadway. And this letter is like a letter of endorsement. It's saying, here's Mr. Severo Gubatan. He's a citizen of the Philippines. He's a good worker. He's law-abiding. He's conscientious, industrious, and he has no prior experience, but I endorse him as a good candidate for employment. So my dad was only like 20 years old, 19, 20, 21 at that time, and he arrived at the corner of First and Broadway. And here's a closer look at this letter, and just really a great letter of endorsement. And here are some images of my dad back in the day. I did notice one of the studios is at 709 North Broadway. So that would place it in today's Chinatown, I believe. And back in the day, these Filipino males who came here would dress up really to present themselves as a stylish, you know, masculine image and send those photographs home. And just some context briefly, you know, the Philippines is a former colony of the United States and was sold to the United States from Spain under the Treaty of Paris in 1898. There was a rebellious forces at work in the Philippine-American War, which led to a lot of deaths. But during this whole era, and I put this here to show the mindset of the time, which was, you know, the colonial empire of the United States. In 1904, there was the World Fair in St. Louis, and they presented the Philippine village with over 1,200 Filipinos to a white audience, and 40 tribes, and it was a whole native soldiers. So here you can see the United States is presenting itself as a world colonial empire. And just more context here to show that during this era, as the Philippines was a colony or commonwealth, there began to see the migration of Filipino males to the United States. They weren't citizens, but they were called wards or nationals. They had free passage, but they could not vote, they could not own property, they could not intermarry. And beginning with the Hawaiian Sugar Plantation Planters Association, there were efforts to recruit unskilled labor for the plantations in Hawaii, and then on the coast, Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California. So I looked up the records, and my father, in 1929, landed in Seattle with his cousin. And so this is an image of the agricultural labor that was filled by Filipino males, including in Los Angeles, in the San Fernando Valley. I saw my dad was part of a lemon picking crew, early on. So here you can see a Filipino labor being recruited for agricultural purposes. So here, I was just looking closely at the growth in that population, and starting with in 1920 and then through 1930, the growth was just tremendous during this period. And more than 45,000 Filipinos were in the United States, 67% in California. In 1926, an organization called the Filipino Federation of America organized a Rizal Day, decorating the downtown LA with flags of the Philippines and the United States. So this was the Federation of America, a very charismatic president, Hilario Moncado. This is an image of Broadway. You can see the Philippine flag, the American flag. That organization sponsored a publication called the Filipino Nation, and this is a truck they used to distribute that publication. So this is 1926, which is 100 years ago. So you began to see the emergence of restaurants, barbershops, employment agencies near Main Street, Los Angeles Street, 2nd Street. So 1924, 721 Filipinos. 1926, 1,277. More barbershops, employment agencies. 1929, more migration. And by 1933, in the span of a few years, there were 6,000 Filipinos in Los Angeles. And Little Manila began to emerge at the corner of like Los Angeles Street, First Street, Weller Street, right across from LA City Hall. The names I mentioned earlier, and there were some UCLA students that began to look at the LA City telephone directory, and just calling through that and identifying locations of Philippine establishments. And they began to identify various businesses, cafes, lunch counters, portrait studios, newspapers, mutual aid societies, clustered around First and Weller and Los Angeles. And if we were to map those locations, you begin to see a pattern of a cluster of a district, which became sort of a cultural business district where Filipino males could go and look for a job, get a haircut, eat at the restaurant. And so this is an attempt to begin to map some of those locations, 1924 to 1939. So again, this is an image of what used to be Weller Street and Los Angeles and First Street. City Hall was built in 1929, So this is 1929 or beyond. And again, this is just illustrating quite a few Philippine-owned establishments, a portrait studio, a Philippine-American Citizens League, a lunch counter, a Pinoy barbershop. And again, just more documentation that these establishments actually did exist. So this is an image of what's called the LVM Cafe at 113 East First Street. LVM refers to the major regions of the Philippine Islands. You have L, Luzon, V, Visayas, M, Mindanao. 113 East First Street. So being the planner I am, of course, I had to correlate where is that exact location. And that location is today City Hall South. So this image actually comes from my dad's photographic collection. It's a little bit later, looks like the 40s, I think, but I can see Eddie Ferrer and Joe Abrigo and the Aquinos. You see some interracial relationships with white women and Filipino men. As you may know, there has been anti-miscegenation law in California prohibiting interracial relationships. So my uncle Eddie Ferrer, he's like the fourth sitting down from the right. He had to go to New Mexico to intermarry with a white wife who was from Arkansas, who came here as part of the Dust Bowl kind of migration. Here's an image of the Filipino Recreational Hall on Main Street. It still stands today. It's right next to the Linda Lea Theater. And when I was small in the 60s, 70s, my father would take me and my brothers and my sister to the Linda Lea Theater at the time because they would present Tagalog movies. And then after that, we would go to a barbershop next door. So I feel like my dad, although by the 60s and 70s, he already had moved and bought a house at Beverly and Dillon, was still drawn to the old neighborhood. And so I remember going to the Linda Lea Theater. And there were boarding houses in downtown LA here, Majestic Hotel at First and Hope, I think. So this is an image of First and Grand, 1929. It's the Music Center today, but in 1929, the Filipino Christian Church was very active. They had a Filipino ministry ministering to these predominantly Filipino males and organized a Filipino center. So where the Music Center today was also an enclave of Filipino residences. So this is a historic find for me I want to share. I also presented to the Little Tokyo Historical Society a few months ago. And in that meeting, I met the grandson of a photographer named Kinso Ninomiya. He had a photography studio on First Street from 1921 to 1942. So he said, I'm going to look it up. I think I have some imagery of Filipinos in that area. And he discovered this image of Manit's Restaurant at 111 North Los Angeles Street. It was owned by B.M. Manit, and you can see it's Manit's Restaurant. So as you can see, the gentleman, and there's a few Filipino women too, are just like dressed just beautifully. I mean, it's, you know, the Macintosh suit, they just look so impeccable, you know, and little would you know that they are houseboys, they are restaurant workers, you know, part of the working class, but they just look impeccable. So this image was a historic find of actually documenting the existence of a Filipino establishment. Similarly, the grandson of Kinso Ninomiya found this image. and the Filipino Patriotic Association team champions of the Indoor Baseball League of Southern California, 1933. And to me, what's striking is that you have City Hall in the background, and the orientation of this photo places this picture on Weller Street, Weller and First. So to me, that's yet more photographic evidence of the existence of Little Manila. And then LA Times, had a columnist, Lee Shippey. He would describe this influx of Filipinos as the Filipino invasion. Late at night, they were thickly sprinkled with Filipinos, and they would ride their nifty roadsters. And, besides the houseboys, many came from hotels and clubs in which they act as pages or callboys. They're dapper, they're chikish. They wear the widest, flappiest trousers flaunted in the street, often the loudest shirts. So, that description is pretty flamboyant, but, it's probably right because, as you saw, they really dressed nicely. And in his other narrative, he talks about Filipinos downtown were noticeable only along Weller Street and First Street, between Weller and Main. Now they're seen on Main Street, on Broadway, on 4th, so we're being invaded by these Filipinos. But there's this famous image, positively no Filipinos allowed. I think it's from Seattle, not LA. But this is a quote from an LAPD officer in 1929 that officers would like to arrest every Filipino and book them all on a murder charge. The government made a mistake by ever making them citizens. They would like nothing better than an open season on Filipinos without a bag limit. And then Carlos Bulosan, America's in the Heart. LAPD often shoot Pinoys like that without provocations. So these are quotes about how this new population of brown men were being perceived. And the taxi dance halls were on Main Street. They no longer exist, but this is an image of the Hippodrome Theater at 3rd and Main. And these places did provide recreational activities. This would be kind of near the pool hall. This is an extensive quote from a newspaper called the Philippine Star Press, 1930. And it talks about Little Manila. It's a modern Mecca of the City of Angels. Very flowery language, and interestingly, Filipinos who come to LA or America actually already know English because English is taught in the public schools in the Philippines as American educators, and that whole system was imported to the Philippines as part of a colonial experience. So here, very flowery, talking about First Street and my other Oriental brothers, the Japanese and the Chinese, and here are more images of well-dressed Filipino men, but again, they're also working people. They're busboys, chauffeurs, butlers. I've heard stories of Filipinos who were chauffeurs with some of the movie stars in Hollywood. Again, my dad, and the middle must be his friend, boxing. So I found this image, the Pangasinan Association banquet in 1937, May 16th, 1937. So I did find my dad way in the back. I counted, there's like 100 Filipino males interspersed with some white women and maybe 1 or 2 Filipino women. So I asked my friend, where was this Café de Paris? And I think it was on 7th Street near MacArthur Park. So here's Carlos Bulosan with another writer, Stanley Garabay. They're at the Clifton Pacific Seas, which used to be on Olive Street, not Clifton's Cafeteria. That was another restaurant. And here we're talking about Bulosan now. He was a very prominent poet and writer, and he wrote America is in the Heart in the 1940s, introduction by Carrie McWilliams. He was rediscovered, I believe, by the ethnic studies, ethnic consciousness movement of the 70s with Asian American studies. So there was a great rediscovery of Bulosan and his writing. And this is a very epic novel of his life experience in California. He wrote a series of articles for the Saturday Evening Post, commenting on President Franklin Roosevelt's Four Freedoms. So he wrote an article on freedom of want from a labor perspective. We are not really free so long as the fruit of our labor is denied us. And this is a visual of that publication. So I know Jean Moy talked about Seattle and Seattle commemorating Bulosan, but most of his life experience was actually in Los Angeles. So he came in 1930 to Los Angeles. Well, he entered through Seattle, but found his way to Los Angeles. He passed away in 1956 before his 50th birthday back in Seattle. But most of his years from 1936 to 1951 were in the Los Angeles area, many years as a patient at the LA County Hospital because he contracted tuberculosis. But during this period, he read incessantly to improve his writing skills, and he started to write poetry. So some researchers at UCLA uncovered FBI files of Carlos Bulosan's whereabouts. And this was published at the UCLA AmerAsia Journal. Lane Roy, Hirabayashi, and Marilyn Akazola. And I was looking at that list, and yes, these locations are in Los Angeles. One location is 1714 and a half Temple Street. That was the Casitas apartment. That's at the corner of Temple and Figueroa. And today that's the DWP site. There's another location, 1026 West 3rd Street from 1942 to 1948. That is now an exit to the freeway. But at 3rd and kind of Beaudry is where that site used to be located. So these locations show he was in Los Angeles, and toward the latter part, he started to reside in the houses of friends who were writers and part of the literati, if you will. And this is his draft registration card, I believe. So you can see 1714 and a half Temple Street, and he's living with his brother Aurelio Bulosan. And I noticed at the top is 1026 West 3rd Street, which was also one of his residences. So Bulosan went to the LA Public Library every day, incessantly. This is a copy of his LA Public Library card. A special thanks to E. San Juan, who's an academic. And you can see every day he would check out a book and then, stamp, return it, check out another book. So not only did he read incessantly at the county hospital when he had tuberculosis, but he also went to the LA Public Library to read. And by the 40s and World War II, I think that ethnic enclave kind of shifted from Little Manila to Temple and Figueroa. And as we see, Bulosan lived in that neighborhood. And there's some commentary from that, he would meet up with his friend, John Fonte, who wrote Ask the Dust, or Carrie McWilliams, at a restaurant right in this neighborhood. So ultimately, this is an image of construction of the freeway and construction of the Civic Center in the 1950s with redevelopment. And I thought about this one time that I worked for the actual agency, the Community Redevelopment Agency, which was responsible for the displacement of ethnic and the population in Bunker Hill. Because back in the day, you had laws that talked about blight, economic, physical blight. So Bunker Hill and the Civic Center were deemed blighted and therefore subject to redevelopment. So as a result of this construction of the freeway and displacement of the community happened, and the community was displaced westward to Temple Beaudry and today's historic Filipinotown. So I'm working with a bunch of interns who are part of the nonprofit Search to Involve Filipino Americans. And SIPA got a grant for like $50,000 from the Robert J. Wood Foundation to study neighborhood change and gentrification in historic Filipinotown. And I told the interns the whole community is actually rooted in that story of displacement dating back to the 1920s. So to summarize, Little Manila and Little Tokyo in downtown LA, question mark. I know the preservationists use that term no longer extant, which means it no longer exists. And that's true today. There's no physical evidence that Little Manila ever existed, but for maybe that Main Street pool hall. Erasure of memory, invisible and hidden. I feel that's a core theme, at least in my community, a concern about erasure of memory. And I feel this whole Little Manila era could conceivably be erased and no one remembers it. But that's why you see in historic Filipinotown very big displays of the community, whether it's the largest mural in the city, in the nation of Filipino mural, or the largest gateway. So to me, what undergirds that effort to display in a very bold way is a sense of not wanting to be acknowledged and erasure of memory. Final thoughts, palimpsest. So Professor Linda Merrim, who wrote the book about Little Manila, once brought up this concept of palimpsest, which is a metaphor, but it relates to back in the day, I guess scribes would use parchment paper, but they would also, use the same parchment paper and write on top of it. So you have layers of history here that need to be validated and shared. But in 2026, how too can we build on our history and find new expressions of our culture and our history in 2026? And ultimately, America is in the Heart by Carlos Bulosan. I want to share there is an effort today to dedicate the Echo Park Branch Library in honor of Carlos Bulosan. So that proposal has been presented to the Mayor Karen Bass, and the librarian and the Library Commission are reviewing that proposal. There's actually a comment period until March to submit comments, and then the matter, I believe, will be taken to the Library Commission. So Seattle recognizes Bulosan. There are other parts of the states that recognize him, but in the city of Los Angeles, there's no such recognition or commemoration. So I'm closing here. More images of my dad. That's him in Echo Park, I think in the 1930s, hanging out on a boat. Here he's playing, the guitar and singing with all his friends, and my uncle Joe Abrigo. That's either Echo Park or Elysian Park. Again, they're at the beach in 1932 in Long Beach, recreating, So I want to thank the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California. This is an anthology that I co-edited with Carlene Sobrino Bonivier and Gregory Villanueva. We all grew up in what we call Historic Filipinotown, and this is an anthology of 40 stories. It includes writings by Carlos Bulosan, and it was just an effort to gather people to share their stories. And so that's an anthology I'm very proud that I was part of. So that concludes my presentation, and I appreciate Chinese Historical Society for inviting me today.
Well, thank you, Gerald, for sharing in a short period of time, just a small slice of Filipino American history. One of the things we talked about before the program started was the possibility of perhaps some of our audience here, perhaps joining in on some of the jitney tours. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what those are about.
Yes, so we have various nonprofit organizations. One is called Filipino Worker Center, PWC. They actually have two jeepneys. A jeepney is a former U.S. Army Jeep, because in the Philippines during World War II, after the war, I guess the Army just left and there were all these Jeeps left in the Philippines, but being very creative, the people converted them into forms of transportation, and they paint them, they decorate them. It's very colorful. And so one of our nonprofits has like two jeepneys, and they will occasionally organize tours of historic Filipinotown in the jeepney so that people can experience that, what it's like. So that is something that the group will occasionally, and it's a great project, Eugene, to organize a jeepney tour. We'd love to do it.
Well, tell us a little bit more. What can people actually see on that jeepney tour, and and maybe comment about the migration outward to other communities. What's happened to the former population that occupied that area?
Yeah, so I'm often asked to do tours, as are others. I base my tour on an itinerary done by Royal Morales. He's a former. He used to lecture at UCLA. He's the son of a preacher at the Filipino Christian Church. He was co-founder of Search to Involve Filipino Americans. But he does this tour starting with Little Manila. Like, he'll have the students come to Weller Street and point out, hey, this once used to be a barber shop, and then he'll take them down Temple Street and discuss the evolution of the community. And then today's Filipino town has noteworthy places, whether they're murals or our nonprofit legacy organizations. We have a World War II veterans monument at one of the city recreational parks. We have a very large mural on Beverly Boulevard, the Gateway. So these are landmarks, but the narrative that goes with this tour also shows, like you said, the evolution of and his history of the community. In 2026, we are seeing gentrification. The last census showed a reduction of 20% of Filipinos since the last census. But my friend said there's also a 20% increase in Santa Clarita. And a good measure is like a Filipino market called Seafood City that has also emerged. So me having grown up in the neighborhood, me and my friends, it was about getting out of the hood. I think it's a port of entry. Immigrants come to America. We aspire to the middle class. We aspire to acquire a house. We aspire to build a family. So I think that's a natural pattern of coming, port of entry. You go where your friends are, family, but you find yourselves moving. So I was on that path to Burbank, but I did return because my mom had Alzheimer's, and I bought a house next to my brother's house just to support her. And but I'm different, I guess. That's reverse gentrification, if you will. But today there are definitely neighborhood changes, and that is being studied by our SEPA interns.
And kind of speaking about that migration to other neighborhoods, uh, I seem to recall that there are now Filipino American elected officials in some outlying communities, whether it's West Covina or Cerritos or other places. Do you have some thoughts to share about that migration? And by the way, in California, isn't the Filipino American population just as large or equal to, or maybe even larger than the Chinese American population?
Yes, it's very much equal to, or if not larger. And there was a big debate when community advocates were lobbying then council member Eric Garcetti to officially designate a historic Filipino town. And the debate was why not, Eagle Rock? Why not Cypress Park? Why not other parts where there? And the idea came up, well, this is truly historic in the sense of kind of the original migration of Filipinos to Los Angeles. But the region definitely has strong populations, whether it's West Covina, Cerritos, really there's a presence in our middle class suburban neighborhoods as well. But the distinction here is, quote, historic. That's how that debate got sort of reconciled.
Yeah. There's a continuing evidence of the migration to the other neighborhoods too. I can tell you that stepping into a 99 Ranch Market in Rancho Cucamonga or one in Corona, or even in my own neighborhood here in Alhambra, where at our 99 Ranch Market we have a Tony's barbecue inside, and then outside in the parking lot there is a uh, what is it? The chicken? Jollibee. Oh yeah, Jollibee. Thank you. My wife has better awareness than I do. And in these other 99 ranch markets I mentioned, there are food counters, but more importantly, I see what it maybe help me with the pronunciation, balik bayan, uh, mail counters that enable people to send care packages back home to the Philippines. So it tells me that within some of these other neighborhoods, there's enough of a Filipino population to support the economic investment by 99 Ranch Market.
That's right. The balikbayan is like a way for families who are now in the United States still thinking of home, thinking of sending back products or funding. It's like a form of foreign aid. It's actually one of the largest forms of foreign aid to the Philippines. And I know my father, when he came here, was always thinking about his family at home and always sending resources to support them. And also the idea of when your relatives or friends come to the United States, like our family would host them and we'd double up in our house. And then ultimately, as they got on their feet, they would move. So one of the families, they were trained doctors from the Philippines, but because California did not recognize their foreign education, my aunt had to move to like Delaware to practice. But in the end, they moved and bought houses in Glendora, and then the relatives followed them. So like the entire neighborhood was probably family members and relatives next to each other, now entering the middle class. And like I said, aspiring to build a family and to buy a house, and to start a life in America.
This country was settled through chain migration. So,
Yes.
you know, no matter what cultural background you come from. Let me get to a couple of questions here. Natalie thanks you for the enlightening talk, and uh, she wonders if you can offer some additional insights into the relationship between the Filipino American community and the Chinese and Japanese American communities uh, in during the interwar period, and also uh, well in the downtown area. But then I'll add to that question also and talk about the relationships uh, elsewhere in other communities. For example, in the historic Salinas Chinatown or Seattle Chinatown, the Filipino and Chinese communities seem to be side by side. So maybe your thoughts on that.
A few months ago, I felt I wanted to initiate a dialogue with the Little Tokyo Historical Society because, as I said in the beginning, I've heard comments about Bronzeville. In fact, there was a nice a presentation, musical presentation at Grand Performances last year about Bronzeville, written by a Japanese American. And so I just felt I wanted to initiate that dialogue, which is why I reached out to the Little Tokyo Historical Society. And to their surprise, you know, they I was raising awareness, and I connected with the grandson of a photographer who had a studio at Weller and First. So I think even that narrative from that Philippine Star News from 1930 talked about my Asian brothers, my Asian brothers, my Chinese and Japanese brothers and sisters. So I'm sure there was that sense of camaraderie or as an Asian. And the other thing I noticed, my dad's photograph, the address is on North Broadway, so there must have been a photographic studio right there on North Broadway.
I, I would think that there are moving houses and other commercial activities on North Broadway that are probably compatible or welcoming to Filipino and other Asian Americans, which is one reason why New Chinatown is where it is today. So, and then maybe the other, and I know that we don't have a whole lot of time, but let's maybe hear your thoughts about uh, the maybe the social relationships. You made a comment earlier about some who intermarried outside, and you know, did, did, do we see a large uh, um, um, not I can't come up with words a large amount of integration maybe if that's a proper word uh, or social integration maybe between uh, Filipino and other cultures.
Yeah, I think in that era, from the 1920s through, say, the 1940s, there were not many Filipino women. It was a predominantly male bachelor society. There were anti-miscegenation laws in California, which legally prohibited interracial marriage, which is why my uncle, Eddie Ferrer, had to go to like New Mexico to marry his white wife, Anne Ferrer, who was part of the Dust Bowl migration. So there were legal and racial barriers to interracial marriage. But I wanted to mention, I don't know if Susie Ling is on the line, but there was a court case with the County of Los Angeles dealing with interracial marriage, and it involved a Filipino male and a white lady who resided in Pasadena. So that court case established some precedent. But yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, ongoing discussion. And I think many, including, well, of course, those of us in the Chinese American community, have seen this continuing transition. Um, just another thought here. Well, first of all, Clay Dooley, formerly U.S. China Center at USC, says, "Sign me up for the jeepney tour." He took he rode in them in when he was in Manila. So there are links that you can look up. But maybe what we'll do is we'll publish it in our email.
I'd love
Michael,
to do that. I think it's a great idea. Maybe we could organize that and
yeah,
round up Chinese Historical Society and
yeah,
come on over.
yeah. We'll plan it. We'll set a date. And we'll invite many of our friends. And by the way, welcome to all friends online who I have acknowledged or I can't acknowledge, but whether it's Clay uh, or Don or Michael from San Diego and Natalie and Bill Yee, many others, longtime friends, longtime members. So we're glad to hear you. I have a question actually from Michael Yee from San Diego. Can you share more about your next goals for the Robert Woods uh, grant and also for SEPA, also for SEPA interns?
Share more about that grant.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that's what Michael is asking about.
So I'm in Historic Filipinotown. I'm part of a informal net group called we call it the Hi-Fi Coalition. It was basically a way to organize our legacy organizations. We have 4 nonprofits that were established in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and we just needed to all come together. And so we came together and it came to our attention there was a grant opportunity from the Robert J. Wood Foundation for $50,000 to study neighborhood change. And we said, let's go for it. And amazingly, we were awarded the grant in collaboration with an urban planning firm, which is based in historic Filipinotown. They're called KDI, the Kun Ki Design Initiative. And so the focus will be studying neighborhood change. And the SEPA interns were identified to assist with engaging in whether it's oral histories or gathering data. And so that study will look at gentrification, what's happening on the ground with respect to neighborhood change. And me as an urban planner, I realize, neighborhoods go through change. They go through an upcycle, a decline. There are always demographic shifts, but it seems in the midst of that, at least my community and many communities want to also preserve a sense of history. And I use the term erasure of memory. I want to tell the story. I want to find ways to share our history. So I did work with some of the interns, and they were talking about displacement, and I realized the Filipino community has a history rooted in displacement, not just today, but we're going back to Little Manila, where decisions were made by policymakers to redevelop property, whether it was the Civic Center Master Plan or the Bunker Hill Redevelopment Project, which were all driven by federal and state highway policy and redevelopment policy. So entire communities were literally leveled. And today, where Carlos Bulosan lived is a freeway, or it's the intersection of a street. And it only exists in our memories, or at least my memory. So one of our interns is actually going to do a geospatial program to map historical locations and maybe make a link to a narrative or resources. So I thought that was a kind of a cool intergenerational project, and I'm going to help her put that together and display on a map historic locations, and maybe it'll demonstrate the pattern of the historical evolution of the community.
Is there a website for Historic Filipinotown that people can look up?
Um, I'll forward it to you. I believe this Hi-Fi Coalition has a website, and that's an effort to coalesce or bring together information of what's going on in the community. And then our legacy organizations also have their respective websites. But I think those organizations too are now not just talking about Historic Filipinotown, but what we call as the diaspora, how to be relevant to the Filipino community, which exists throughout the whole region.
But by the way, on our walking tours, we share the locations in Chinatown that are popular with the Filipino community. Some of the local restaurants have found an audience preparing certain dishes, especially seafood or fish or crab. But Full House on Hill Street is popular, as well as Mayflower on Spring Street. In Mayflower, if you go in there, there's actually a Manny Pacquiao shrine with many photographs that show when he was living in Los Angeles, how he would socialize or network with the local Filipino and Chinatown community. So there's a long history of.
Full confession, yeah. I'm guilty. My family too has gone to Mayflower and those other restaurants in Chinatown because the food is good, but it's very, affordable, yeah, and can serve a large group. So
yeah, and there's actually a big social hall connected to it, and so I've actually stumbled into the restaurant when there was actually a wedding reception going on in the next room. So anyway, we really have to start closing. I just want to, and first of all, if you were in the room, I would ask for a round of applause for our speaker. And thank you very much for joining in and sharing the history of the Filipino American community in Los Angeles. Those of you who have who want to search for more background, you'll also want to search for things like St. Malo, the first Filipino community in America, off the coast of Louisiana. And there's really much more. So hopefully this will be just the start of an exploration. So before I close, though, I want to comment on some of our upcoming community events for those who want to know what the Lunar New Year activities are going to be in Chinatown. We have this Chinatown pageant on February 8th. We have our big parade on Saturday, February 21st. I see Bill Yee in the audience, and hopefully you and your family and grandkids can all join us on Saturday as you have in the past. February 28th, the Firecracker Bike Ride, and March 1st, the Firecracker 10K, 5K run. So hopefully some of you can join in. I will close with a comment that actually Terrence Butcher in our audience shared, and he said that there is a line in a Raymond Chandler novel, as many of you know, wrote about the Los Angeles noir detective scene here. But one of Chandler's comments was, as good looking as a Filipino on a Saturday night. So just seeing that image, Gerald, of the well dressed
Yes.
people, I mean, that is a good, strong image, as many of us have. So thank you for sharing. And we hope that we can um, hear more about the future. We'll hope to.
And we'll do the jitney tour, the jitney ride.
I would love to do that. So anyway, well, thank you, Gerald, and thank you all in the audience for joining in and sharing your comments and thoughts. Um, feel free to drop in at the Historical Society on Sunday afternoons from 2 to 5 when we have open house, 411 Bernard Street. So hopefully we'll see you in person or we'll see you online in a future meeting. Thank you, Gerald, and thank you, everyone, for joining in tonight. Have a great evening.